which I wholeheartedly support, which were outlined previously and moved by the member for Newland, which does acknowledge the fantastic work done and being done by the new government and the new Minister for Health and Wellbeing. In rising, Mr Deputy Speaker, I do recognise the efforts of the recently established expert working group by the Minister for Health and Wellbeing in the other place that has been charged with developing a set of recommendations for the best response to beating this disease. It is with particular interest that I feel moved to support this motion and its amendments and to commend the member for Mount Gambier on raising it, noting that his community has also been directly impacted by recent deaths from meningococcal B. His effort to recognise the particular prevalence of this particular strain. For many years in the Narungga electorate, and particularly in the Copper Coast area, meningococcal and its devastating impact on families has been highlighted via the Page Weatherspoon Foundation, set up by Nikki and Dwayne Weatherspoon upon the death of their 22-month-old daughter, Paige, in 2000. In the 18 years since, Nikki and Dwayne and Foundation helpers and volunteers have annually held Violet Day on the 1st of August every year, which was Paige's birthday, and have raised nearly $500,000 and have done much to shine a light on the symptoms and devastation of meningococcal disease, which was virtually unheard of in my district prior to the death of young Paige Weatherspoon. It is how quickly the disease spreads and kills that is so disturbing, Mr Deputy Speaker. That and the fact that its symptoms are common to minor illnesses. Nikki and Dwayne have told the story many times over the years of how Paige had looked tired and had a temperature, but it was taken as just a typical childhood virus, and her mother had just given her a Panadol and tucked her into bed as part of their solution. Paige slept until lunchtime, laid on the couch in the afternoon, and still had a temperature, but nothing appeared out of the ordinary. By 10:30 p.m. that night, Paige had complained of sore legs, and Nikki noticed bruise-like spots on them. She rang the doctor, but the advice came back that it was likely just a respiratory virus and to bring her in the next day if things hadn't improved. By 2 a.m. that night, Mr Deputy Speaker, the rash had become significantly worse and she was rushed to hospital, but agonisingly, Paige passed away. Common symptoms such as feeling tired, vomiting a couple of times, having a temperature, and can all be attributed to just a simple virus, which is what makes meningococcal so difficult to recognise and, in turn, so dangerous. All children will inevitably have symptoms of this sort at various times throughout their childhood, which makes it even more difficult to determine. Others listed as symptoms to look out for with meningococcal include headache, neck stiffness and tiny red and purple spots, but these are not always prevalent or evident, Mr Deputy Speaker. And when the spots come on, it is often too late, which is evidence of how quickly this disease takes hold. That is why awareness of the signs is so vitally important and early detection so key. Prompt diagnosis of meningococcal can be life-saving. Every year on Paige's birthday, the Page Weatherspoon Foundation celebrates Violet Day, chosen because purple was Paige's favourite colour. Trading stalls are held selling all sorts of purple items, including wristbands and pens, and many local schools mark the occasion, often with a Wear Something Purple Day. And the trading stalls are not just held on the Copper Coast. Schools, kindergartens, care groups, aged care homes and hospitals have all been involved in the past from around the state. From as far away as Port Lincoln and Roxby Downs, holding morning teas or sausage sizzles, anything to highlight the disease and to educate on how it is spread and its symptoms. The disease is a severe infection that can infect anyone, anywhere, but most at risk are children under 5, like Paige, teenagers and young adults, and, of course, older people. Sadly, most cases are isolated and not related to another case or an outbreak. Sadly, the B strain has recorded as a higher prevalence in South Australia over all other states, hence Minister Wade's action on this issue. The government and the new Minister for Health and Wellbeing is fully committed to creating a targeted, localised response which will ensure that the disease feels the maximum impact of that particular response. The Minister for Health and Wellbeing has already established a multi-sectorial expert working group, which has been alluded to previously, Mr Deputy Speaker, which occurred on the 26th of April this year and consists of SA Health clinicians and immunologists, as well as independent experts in the field of meningococcal disease and immunisation more broadly. This working group has already started work on a set of recommendations for the optimal response to combat this disease, this strain of the disease, and for the state of South Australia's betterment. In its current review of recommendations relating to the meningococcal B vaccination, the Peak National Clinical Advisory Group has highlighted the need to optimise vaccination amongst a range of priority target groups, including young children under the age of 2, Indigenous children up to 5, adolescents, young adults, and those who are at a higher risk of the disease due to pre-existing medical conditions. Due to clinical concern about the greater proportion of B strain cases in South Australia, as well as increasing community concern, the expert working group will consider all options for a community vaccination program. The B strain is the last to have a vaccination available, hence the expert working group which was recently established by this government, involving the aforementioned clinicians and immunologists, and the urgency for developing a set of recommendations as the best response to this disease. So I support the member for Mount Gambier's motion with the amendments outlined by the member for Newland to reflect the action already taken by this government and the ongoing efforts to combat meningococcal disease, and I urge the support of all members in this House for the amendments.
The member for Frome.
Thank you. Mr Speaker, you're back in there. First up, can I express my utter disgust at this amendment coming up to change the motion that has been put forward by the member for Mount Gambier. The amendment basically is part of, by establishing a committee, saying that the amendment states that the Minister for Health has established it, but however, the third part of the member for Mount Gambier was calling on the government, the Liberal Marshall government, to implement a vaccination program. In this amendment, there is no timeframes in this. There is no timeframes whatsoever, and I am very, very disappointed that it appears to be a political and bipartisan support for a great motion by the member for Mount Gambier. Mr Speaker, can I say that we look at our children, our grandchildren, and see their lively faces, their innocence, their growing to young adults, and then achieving some direction in their adult lives. However, Mr Speaker, for many parents, this scenario does not eventuate due to some illnesses that these young people may contract. Australia has for many years had various immunisations, and there are immunisations that are getting better. However, at the same time, there are emerging new diseases emerging and coming to light every day. One of the emerging diseases is meningococcal B, which is emerging in addition to other strains of this very drastic and disastrous disease. As we are aware, these diseases are an intense bacterial infection that can cause death within hours if not treated. The speech from the member for Mount Gambier and about the 2 children and the families that have already had these incidents there. All Australian children are vaccinated against the C strain through the immunisation program, but not the B strain. To my information, there are 5 main strains of this disease in Australia, and vaccines for all of them, but only the C strain is not on the national immunisation, the PBS. And given free, the rest of them are given free to children aged up to 2 years. The B strain is available from GPs, but as the Leader of the Opposition has indicated, and others, it's a cost of around about $500 for the vaccination period. When I was a child, we were immunised against polio, which at that particular time had a very devastating effect. We also, over the years, have been immunising young infants against tetanus and other diseases. And it's now time to look at the same process for this new disease. Australia is now participating on a whole wide world, and although our hygienic controls are excellent, there are always every chance that our young children will contract a new strain of any disease. To lose a child is every parent's nightmare. I can talk from personal experience, as we lost our grandson over 8 years ago, aged 18 months, from drowning. Whilst every precautions were taken into effect there that day, the accident still happened. The effect on my daughter, my family and our friends is still being felt to this very day. I asked the members on the other side to think very seriously about this amendment, which has no time frame on it, but the motion coming from the member for Mount Gambier asked the Marshall Liberal government to implement the vaccination program now. I would ask them, how would they feel to see their child or their grandchild being held by the mother and the mother saying, "Dad, I cannot wake the child up. The child is not responding to actually try and wake him up." That is what may happen by deferring this vaccination program. This notion by the member for Mount Gambier is just common sense and needs to be endorsed by the Liberal government straight away. As the member for Hammond mentioned a bit earlier on, the Marshall Liberal government will support the previous motion of No Tobacco Day, where only policies and promotions can be undertaken. This motion by the member for Mount Gambier asks the Marshall Liberal government to implement a vaccination program and establish a committee. Well, this amendment already says they're going to establish a committee, but it doesn't give any timeframes about the immunisation program. By getting an immunisation program straight away, it reduces the chance of contracting this disease and allow a child to have a life. I believe, as we mentioned earlier, that this has already been costed us about $24.5 million over 4 years. That's $6 million a year. What is the value of a life of a child to allow them to actually grow up and enjoy? What is the value of not having a parent to worry about having to cuddle and try and wake up a deceased child? What is the value of some people out there who cannot afford to have this immunisation? $500 over a period for 4 immunisations for this disease is absolutely out of the reach of a lot of people in South Australia. In my view, the Liberal government should just implement the meningococcal B vaccination program. This process would dramatically reduce the opportunity for a child to contract this devastating disease. This would result in the prevention of allowing a child to increase the opportunity for a child to have a life when presenting a disease. Again, can I say, Mr. Speaker, I ask the members on the other side